Living with my sister, Kelly was like being trapped in a psychological war zone. She was mean, manipulative, and, to put it plainly, psychopathic. Every day was a new kind of torment. But the worst part was my mom, her biggest enabler. Anytime Kelly went too far, my mom would either turn a blind eye or outright support her. I'd learned over the years that no one was coming to my rescue. I often felt like I was in a twisted nightmare, a helpless bystander as my sister's cruelty was fed by my mother's indifference. Growing up in that house, I had no real peace. Kelly wasn't just a bully. She reveled in finding new ways to hurt me. It wasn't just the insults. It was the small, calculated ways she'd chip away at me. She'd hide things I needed for school or destroy something I loved just to watch me crumble. The worst part was the way my mom always justified her behavior. "She's just playing around," my mom would say dismissively whenever Kelly crossed the line. "You're too sensitive." I kept thinking I could make it through. I told myself things would get better when I was older, but they never did. Things hit a new low one Friday night. I had spent weeks gathering the courage to tell my mom that I wanted to apply to colleges out of state. It felt like my one shot at freedom. Maybe it was naive of me, but part of me hoped she'd at least pretend to be happy for me. Deep down, I wanted her approval just once. I wanted her to tell me she believed in me, that I could do it. Instead, when I brought it up, Kelly was lounging on the couch like the queen of cruelty, her phone glued to her hand. She didn't even look up at me when she started laughing. "You? Moving out? You'd never make it," she sneered, flipping through her phone. "Why don't you just call yourself? It'd make things easier for everyone." I froze. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that, but this time I couldn't hide the shock on my face. Kelly had always been cruel, but telling me to kill myself? That wasn't something you just shrugged off. What stunned me more was my mom's reaction. She didn't tell Kelly to stop. She didn't defend me. She just looked me in the eye and nodded. "Maybe she's right," my mom said calmly, like we were discussing a chore. "You're not cut out for it. You're not strong enough." Her words cut deeper than anything Kelly had ever said. It was like the final blow, the moment I realized I didn't matter to her. Not really. My own mother thought I was too weak to survive on my own, and worse, she didn't care if I did. All those years I had held on, thinking maybe one day she'd come through for me, disappeared in an instant. That was it. I felt my heart drop, the crushing weight of their words suffocating me. I knew I had to leave. I had to escape, or I wasn't going to survive. Not just emotionally, but physically. If I stayed, I'd either become a shell of myself, or worse, I'd give into the darkness that had been threatening to swallow me whole for years. But leaving quietly wasn't going to be easy. I knew they'd try to stop me, especially my mom. And if Kelly got wind of it, I shuddered to think what she might do. I couldn't trust them. Not anymore. This wasn't just about going to college. It was about saving myself. And I was done waiting for someone else to do it for me. It was time to leave this toxic hellhole behind, no matter what it took. After that brutal confrontation, the words my mom and Kelly had said still rang in my ears, like poison dripping slowly into my mind. But something else had clicked in me that night. Fear had always kept me in that house, but now, something stronger pushed me to leave survival. I couldn't afford to stay another day in that toxic environment. So I did the only thing I could do. I started planning my escape. Over the years, I had managed to squirrel away some money from my part-time job at a nearby cafe. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cover a bus ticket out of town and a few nights at a cheap motel. My small savings had been my only hope, the lifeline I had clung to whenever things got bad. I hadn't been saving for anything specific at first, just a safety net for a future I thought I'd eventually need. Now, that future was here. The next few days felt like walking through a minefield. Kelly's usual jabs, the snide remarks about my appearance, intelligence, or worth, didn't stop. My mom continued her cold indifference, offering no affection, no comfort, nothing that would make me believe she'd ever care if I disappeared. They didn't notice the change in me, though. They couldn't see the quiet determination building behind the facade I carefully crafted. Every smile, every nod, every indifferent sure was part of the act I had to maintain until I could leave. I had to play the part of the dutiful daughter, the weak sister, while inside I counted down the hours until freedom. Leaving during the day was out of the question. If I tried, they'd corner me with questions, or worse, physically stop me from leaving. Kelly thrived on control, and my mom was too wrapped up in enabling her to ever let me go. So, I decided that midnight would be my only chance. It was the only time I could move undetected. Everyone would be asleep, and I could slip out with just the essentials. A small bag with a few changes of clothes, my phone, and my laptop. I couldn't risk taking too much, Traveling light meant I could move fast, and moving fast was everything. The hardest part wasn't the physical preparation, though. It was the emotional battle. Kelly's taunts hadn't softened since that last argument. She was relentless. "You're still here? Guess you're too scared to actually do anything with your life." She'd sneer as she passed me in the hall. And my mom, well, she wasn't much better. Her silence was louder than Kelly's words. She'd look at me like I was the disappointment of her life, the one who had always been too sensitive, too weak to handle anything. I wondered if she had always seen me as a burden. I knew I couldn't let them get to me. Not now. I just had to make it through a few more days. The domestic violence shelter I found was about an hour outside the city, and I had already memorized the bus schedule. I couldn't believe I was actually looking into shelters. Me, someone who always thought those places were for other women, women whose stories I couldn't fully relate to. Now I realized I was one of them, and there was no shame in that. As the days dragged on, I became more focused. I kept my head down, worked my shifts at the cafe, and came home like clockwork, pretending like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was preparing for the biggest move of my life. I stopped feeling nervous and started feeling resolved. Kelly's taunts and my mom's coldness didn't sting as much anymore because I knew I wouldn't have to hear them for much longer. By the time Friday night rolled around, I had everything packed. I went to bed that night, pretending to sleep, waiting until the house fell into its usual eerie silence. The moment the clock struck 1 a.m., I carefully slid out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest, and began to gather my things. I had rehearsed this moment in my head so many times. I glanced around my room one last time, not feeling any attachment to it. It had been a prison for years, and I was ready to leave it all behind. But as I quietly opened my bedroom door, I heard a sound, a soft creak from down the hall. My heart stopped. Someone was awake. The house was eerily quiet as I tiptoed toward the door, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a thunderclap in my ears. My heart was pounding so hard, I was convinced the sound would betray me. Each step felt like a countdown to freedom, but the fear of being caught kept my muscles tense, my mind hyper-aware of every shadow. I had rehearsed this moment so many times in my head, but none of that mattered now. The only thing that mattered was getting out of this house and never coming back. I had packed everything I could carry without drawing suspicion. A few clothes, my laptop, my phone charger, and a stash of emergency cash I'd hidden away over the years. My ID and bus ticket were tucked safely in my coat pocket. I had researched the routes carefully. There was a 2:30 a.m. bus heading out of town. If I could make it there without being caught, I'd be gone before they even realized I had left. My hand was on the doorknob, the cool metal feeling like the last barrier between me and freedom. But then I heard it, the unmistakable creak of the hallway floor behind me. "Where do you think you're going?" I froze. The voice was low, threatening, and unmistakable. I slowly turned around, my stomach sinking like a stone as I locked eyes with my mom standing in the hallway. She wasn't groggy or confused from waking up. No, she was wide awake, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed. She knew exactly what I was trying to do, and she wasn't going to let me go easily. "You really thought you could just leave? That easy?" Her voice was sharp, full of contempt. "You're not going anywhere." My breath caught in my throat, panic surging through me. I felt like a cornered animal, my mind racing, trying to figure out how I'd been caught. I had been so careful. How did she know? My heart pounded harder, my hand still gripping the doorknob, as if turning it could somehow get me out of this nightmare. "Mom, I need to go. I can't stay here anymore," I managed to stammer, my voice shaking. "Don't you dare play the victim now," she spat, stepping closer. "After everything I've done for you? And this is how you repay me? Running away like a coward?" I could feel the familiar guilt rising up inside me, the same guilt that had kept me trapped in this house for years. But this time something was different. I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me. "Not tonight. I'm not running away," I said, forcing myself to stand taller, to meet her glare head on. "I'm leaving because I deserve better than this. I deserve to live a life where I'm not constantly being belittled or told I'm worthless." Her face twisted in anger. "Worthless? Oh, poor you. Always playing the victim. You think the world owes you something just because you're too weak to handle a little bit of criticism? You'll never make it out there. You're nothing without us." That was when I realized she wasn't just angry that I was leaving. She was terrified. Terrified that without me around to control, her grip over everything would slip. I had been her scapegoat, the person she could project all her insecurities and frustrations onto. And now, I was taking that power away from her. Behind her, I noticed Kelly's bedroom door had opened slightly. Kelly was standing there, watching the confrontation unfold with that same smug, cruel smile she always wore whenever she had the upper hand. But for once, I didn't care what she thought. I was done playing the role they had cast me in. "I'm leaving, Mom," I said, my voice steadier now. "And you can't stop me." For a second, it looked like she might lash out physically, her fists clenching at her sides. But then, her eyes flicked toward Kelly, and something shifted in her expression. The anger was still there, but underneath it, I saw desperation. She had lost control, and she knew it. "You'll regret this," she hissed, stepping aside. "You'll come crawling back, and don't expect us to be waiting with open arms." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I turned the doorknob and walked out into the cold night, my heart pounding in my chest. The door clicked shut behind me, but I didn't stop moving. I walked down the driveway, each step feeling lighter than the last. When I finally reached the street, I allowed myself to breathe. For the first time in years, I felt a small glimmer of hope. I wasn't free yet. There was still so much uncertainty ahead, but I had taken the first step. And for the first time, I was proud of myself. Before I could react, my mom lunged forward and grabbed my arm, her nails digging deep into my skin, sharp enough to leave crescent-shaped marks. "You're not leaving this house," she hissed through clenched teeth, her face twisted with anger. "You think you're better than us? That you can just walk away?" The venom in her voice was something I had heard countless times before, but this time I wasn't backing down. I yanked my arm away, my voice trembling with emotion. "I can't stay here, Mom. I need to go." My words were desperate, but firm. My heart raced, knowing that every second counted. Kelly was likely still lurking in her room, and if she decided to get involved, things would spiral quickly into a nightmare. But my mom didn't care. Her grip tightened, pulling me back toward her as she struggled to maintain control. She was stronger than I expected, her fingers digging in, using all her strength to stop me from getting to the door. I could feel the heat of her breath on my neck, the desperation in her grip. It wasn't just anger, it was control. She had to keep me here, had to keep me under her thumb, like she always had. My throat felt tight as the adrenaline surged through me. "Let go," I gasped, pushing her away, but she wouldn't budge. I knew I had to be quick. Kelly wouldn't stay hidden for long. The moment she heard the commotion, she'd come barreling down the stairs, and I couldn't even imagine what she would do. The look on her face earlier, the one she always gave when she was about to do something cruel, had flashed in my mind. I knew if Kelly got involved, I wouldn't stand a chance. My mom, still holding on to me, leaned in closer, her voice dripping with bitterness. "You're not leaving this house. You think you'll make it out there on your own? You'll come crawling back like the pathetic little girl you are." Those words, "pathetic little girl," ignited something inside me. For years, she had worn me down with insults, making me feel worthless, powerless. But now, standing at the threshold of freedom, I couldn't let her win again. I wasn't going to be her victim anymore. In a surge of desperation, I shoved her off me with every bit of strength I had left. She stumbled back, and in that split second I darted for the door. My hands shook as I fumbled with the handle, but somehow I managed to swing it open. I was halfway out when I felt her reach for me again, her fingers brushing against the fabric of my coat, but I was faster. I bolted through the doorway, her furious shouts echoing after me, mixing with the sounds of the night. "You think you're free?" she screamed. "You'll never be free." The words followed me like a curse as I sprinted down the driveway, the cold night air hitting my face, making it hard to breathe. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I didn't even look back. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I kept running, my feet slapping against the pavement as I put as much distance as I could between myself and that house. It wasn't until I reached a few blocks away, panting and gasping for breath, that I finally slowed down. My legs were shaking, barely able to hold me up, but the overwhelming sense of relief washed over me. I was free. For now. I stood there, bent over, my hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath, trying to process what had just happened. My arm still stung where my mom had grabbed me, and I could already feel the bruises forming. But I didn't care. All that mattered was that I had made it out. I had escaped. But what now? The thought hit me like a wave. I didn't have a clear plan beyond getting out of the house. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling, and quickly looked up the address of the shelter I had found earlier. It was a few miles away, far enough from my neighborhood that I wouldn't run into anyone who knew me. I took one last look down the dark, empty street, then started walking toward the bus stop, my breath still coming in shaky gasps. I knew that this was just the beginning. Leaving was the hardest step, but what lay ahead would be a whole new set of challenges. But for the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of hope. For the first time, I felt like I had a chance to create something better for myself. And that thought kept me moving forward, away from the darkness of my past and toward whatever lay ahead. When I finally reached the shelter, I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. The woman at the front desk, a kind-looking lady with graying hair, immediately sensed my panic. Her gentle, understanding eyes softened as I stammered out my story, my voice cracking with each painful detail. She didn't rush me. She listened patiently as I explained everything. My sister, my mom, the fight, the escape. It felt surreal to be speaking the words out loud, like I was narrating someone else's life. "You're safe here," she said softly, before leading me down a quiet hallway to a small, modest room. The space was simple: a twin bed, a worn-out chair by the window, and a small dresser. The room was quiet, calm, a stark contrast to the chaos I'd just run from. "You can rest here as long as you need to," she added, handing me a fresh towel and pointing to the bathroom down the hall. "There are others here too. If you need to talk, we're all here to support you." The kindness in her voice made my throat tighten with emotion. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was in a place where I didn't have to be on high alert. No cruel sister waiting to mock me. No mother turning a blind eye to my pain. Just silence and a sense of safety I had almost forgotten existed. I collapsed onto the bed, my body sinking into the worn mattress, and for a moment, all the tension, all the fear, and all the adrenaline I had been running on finally drained out of me. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt the dampness on my face. It wasn't the same suffocating fear I was used to. It was something different, something like relief. The kind of tears you cry when you survive something, even if you're not sure what comes next. The first few nights in the shelter were a blur. I slept more than I had in months, my body and mind slowly beginning to heal from the constant state of fight or flight I had been living in. But with each passing day, the reality of what I'd done sank in deeper. I had left. I had finally broken free. But now what? I had no real plan, no clear path forward, just the overwhelming sense that I couldn't go back, not ever. The shelter staff were patient, checking on me daily, offering resources and connecting me with a counselor who specialized in domestic abuse and trauma. It was in those sessions that I started piecing together the fragments of what had happened to me over the years. The emotional manipulation, the toxic dynamic with my mom, the way Kelly had chipped away at my self-worth for as long as I could remember. Talking about it helped, but what helped even more was the community of women at the shelter. Many of them had fled similar situations, some escaping abusive partners, others running from families that had tried to break them. We shared our stories over cups of weak coffee in the common area, finding solidarity in the pain we had all endured. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a bond that came from surviving things most people couldn't imagine. One woman, Natalie, had arrived a few weeks before me. Her situation was different, but the look in her eyes told me she understood my story without me having to explain it. She had escaped an abusive relationship with her partner, but like me, her emotional wounds ran deep. She became my confidant in those early days, someone I could talk to without fear of judgment. "We're stronger than they think," she told me one night, her voice steady as she sipped from a chipped mug. "We've already done the hardest part, leaving. Now, we figure out what's next." Her words stuck with me. I hadn't thought of it that way before. I had always seen myself as weak, unable to stand up to Kelly or my mom. But maybe leaving had been a sign of strength, not weakness. Maybe the hardest part was behind me. The shelter wasn't a permanent solution, and I knew that. But it was a place where I could breathe, where I could begin to heal without the constant threat of cruelty hanging over me. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't dictated by fear. A future where I was in control of my own life. Slowly, I started making plans. I applied to a few colleges out of state, determined to build a life far away from the toxicity I had known for so long. I reached out to the shelter support services, learning about programs that could help me with housing and financial aid once I was ready to leave. It wasn't much, but it was a start. In the quiet of the shelter, I began to believe in the possibility of something better. I wasn't sure where the road ahead would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. I was never going back. Not to that house, not to that life. I had survived the storm, and now it was time to rebuild. Living in the shelter gave me a perspective I hadn't had in years. It was like stepping out of a fog, slowly beginning to see the damage I'd been carrying with me for so long. Kelly's words echoed less in my head, and my mother's absence felt like a relief rather than a loss. But healing was slow, and I wasn't quite sure who I was outside of the person they had beaten down for so long. I started therapy shortly after arriving. The first session was overwhelming. I sat in front of a stranger, someone who listened without judgment, and I found myself struggling to explain the years of emotional abuse I had endured. There were so many layers to unpack. The manipulation, the constant belittling, the way my self-worth had been tied to pleasing two people who were never satisfied. I had normalized so much of it that, at first, I didn't even know where to begin. "Tell me about Kelly," the therapist Miriam had prompted one afternoon, her voice gentle but probing. I swallowed hard. Talking about Kelly was always the hardest. "She's a bully," I began almost too softly. "But it's more than that. She enjoys tearing me down. It's like she feeds off it." Miriam nodded. "And your mother?" I paused. "She supports her, encourages her. Like Kelly can do no wrong." I thought maybe she'd stop it, defend me, but she never did. Not once. The session moved slowly, with long pauses as I tried to articulate the complex web of pain I'd been trapped in for years. But by the end of it, I felt lighter, like I had finally let go of something I'd been holding on to for too long. It wasn't immediate relief, but it was a start. Back at the shelter, the women around me were my pillars of strength. We didn't always talk about the specifics of our pasts, but there was a quiet understanding in the way we supported each other. One night, after a particularly difficult day of therapy, I found myself sitting in the common room, sipping a cup of tea that had gone cold. A few of the other women sat around me, laughing softly at a joke someone had cracked. It felt so normal, so peaceful, like a glimpse of what life could be. "You look deep in thought," Natalie said, sitting next to me with a smile. "I am," I admitted, staring at my tea. "I've been thinking about what comes next. I've always wanted to go to college, but that dream felt impossible, like something out of reach." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Why? You're out now. You can do anything." Her words hit me harder than I expected. You could do anything. I hadn't felt that kind of freedom in so long that I didn't even recognize it anymore. "I don't know," I said hesitantly. "What if I'm not cut out for it? What if—" My voice trailed off, the old doubts creeping in. I could hear Kelly's voice in the back of my mind, mocking me, telling me I'd never amount to anything. But Natalie wasn't having it. "Listen, I've known you for a few weeks, and I can already tell you're stronger than you think. You've been through hell, and you're still standing. College? You'll crush it." I smiled at her encouragement, but deep down, I wasn't fully convinced. Could I really do it? Could I build a life of my own, free from the suffocating hold my family had on me? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to try. So the next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I filled out a college application. I didn't tell anyone at first. It felt too fragile, like if I spoke about it, the dream would slip through my fingers. But the act of applying felt empowering. It was a declaration to myself, to the universe, that I wasn't going to be defined by my past. Over the next few weeks, I started applying to more schools, each one a little farther from my hometown. I didn't want Kelly or my mom to find me. I wanted a fresh start, a life where they had no control over me. And the more I imagined that life, the more determined I became. Therapy helped, but the women in the shelter were my real source of strength. We would sit around the common room at night, sharing our dreams for the future. One woman, Cassie, talked about becoming a nurse, another about going back to school to become a lawyer. We were all so different, yet our stories of survival connected us. "I'm proud of you," Natalie said one evening, after I told her I had sent off my first college application. "Thanks," I said, the weight of her words settling over me. I wasn't used to hearing those words. "I'm proud of you." But for the first time in my life, I was starting to feel proud of myself too. And with that, I knew one thing for certain. I was never going back. Not to that house, not to Kelly, not to the person I used to be. I was building something new, something stronger, something that was mine. The day I received the acceptance email felt like the first real victory I had ever experienced. It was a quiet afternoon at the shelter, and I had just finished my shift at the coffee shop. I remember walking into my room, the sun filtering through the small window, casting long shadows on the walls. I sat on my bed, my mind swirling with thoughts of the future, when my phone buzzed with a notification. At first, I thought it was just another spam email or one of the many newsletters I've forgotten to unsubscribe from. But when I saw the subject line, "Congratulations, you've been accepted," I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the screen, unsure if I was reading it right. With trembling hands, I clicked on the email and held my breath as it loaded. There it was, clear as day. I had been accepted into the university I wanted. I read it over and over again, letting the words sink in. This wasn't just an acceptance letter. It was my escape route, my lifeline. I sat there in stunned silence, a flood of emotions crashing over me. For so long, I had felt like I was running from something, running from my past, from my family, from the person they had tried to make me believe I was. But now, for the first time, it felt like I was running toward something bigger, something hopeful. I bolted out of my room, practically tripping over myself as I rushed to the common area where some of the women were gathered. Natalie, who had become one of my closest friends in the shelter, was sitting on the worn-out couch, sipping tea and chatting with Cassie. I got in. I blurted out, barely able to contain my excitement. Natalie looked up, wide-eyed. You got in? Like college? I nodded frantically, holding up my phone as if it was proof of my new reality. I got in. The room erupted in cheers. Natalie jumped up and hugged me, and Cassie clapped with genuine joy. For a moment, I felt like I was floating. All the hardships, all the emotional scars, all the nights I spent doubting myself, it all seemed worth it. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the realization hit me again. I was really going to college. I was going to have a life that wasn't dictated by Kelly's cruelty or my mom's neglect. I was going to have a life of my own. But with that excitement came the familiar pang of fear. What if I wasn't cut out for this? What if I failed? Those doubts, those nagging voices from the past, Kelly's voice, kept whispering in the back of my mind, reminding me of every time I'd been told I wasn't good enough. I thought about calling my mom to tell her the news. For just a moment, I wanted her to know, to hear her say she was proud of me. But then I remembered the last words she had said to me before I escaped, how she had sided with Kelly, how she had dismissed me as weak. And I realized I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't need validation from the people who had tried to break me down. This was my victory, and no one was going to take that away from me. In the days that followed, I began making plans. There was so much to prepare for: finances, housing, classes, but every step felt like I was reclaiming control over my life. The women at the shelter helped me gather information about scholarships and grants. Natalie even came with me to a local thrift store to pick out a few pieces of furniture for my future dorm room. I kept replaying the moment I received the acceptance email in my mind. It felt like the universe was finally giving me a break, finally throwing me a lifeline after years of drowning in my family's toxicity. One evening, as I was packing a box of my things for the move, I sat down and took a deep breath. I reflected on how far I had come. Just a few months ago, I had been trapped in that house, suffocating under the weight of Kelly's constant torment. I had felt hopeless, broken, like there was no way out. But now, I was on the brink of something new, something real. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew that. College would be a challenge, and so would adjusting to life on my own without the safety net of the shelter. But for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. I wasn't running away anymore. I was running toward my future. Starting college felt like I was finally stepping out of the shadows and into the sunlight. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was living life on my own terms. No Kelly, no mom, no constant fear that I was going to be knocked down or dragged back into the toxicity that had shaped my entire existence. It was a clean slate, and I was ready to make the most of it. At first, I threw myself into my studies like my life depended on it. In a way, it did. Each assignment I completed, each test I aced, felt like I was reclaiming the part of me that had been so crushed and diminished back home. Every A on my transcript was a reminder that I was capable, that I wasn't the failure Kelly had spent years trying to convince me I was. College wasn't easy. Nothing worth having is, but I worked tirelessly because I was finally building something for myself. No one could take this away from me. The campus was large, intimidating even, but it was filled with a diverse range of people who weren't interested in tearing me down. I remember the first time I actually felt comfortable around others. It was during a group study session in the library. A few of us were cramming for a psych exam, joking around in between note-taking, when I realized I wasn't worried about saying something stupid. I wasn't nervous about being judged or ridiculed. These people, these new friends, accepted me for who I was. They liked me. It was such a foreign feeling, but I embraced it. And then there was Adam. Meeting him was completely unexpected. He was in one of my core classes, tall, with messy dark hair and warm, inviting eyes. At first, we were just study buddies, chatting between classes, sharing notes, and occasionally grabbing coffee together. But as the months passed, something shifted. He wasn't like anyone I had ever known. He was patient, kind, and had this way of making me feel safe just by being near him. It was strange feeling safe around a man after everything I'd been through. But Adam was different. He didn't push or rush anything. He just was there, steady and supportive, letting me set the pace. We started spending more time together, and slowly, I found myself letting my guard down. I told him about my past, about Kelly, about my mom, about the years of cruelty I had endured. I half expected him to pull away, to decide that I was too broken to deal with. But he didn't. He listened, really listened, and then he looked me in the eyes and said, "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known." I'll never forget that moment. His words hit me harder than any insult Kelly had ever thrown at me. For so long, I had felt weak, helpless, like I was constantly clawing my way out of a pit I could never escape. But Adam saw me as strong, and slowly I started to see myself that way too. As the semesters passed, I started taking care of myself in ways I hadn't before. Therapy sessions became a priority, not just an obligation. I exercised regularly, ate better, and slept more. I even picked up new hobbies, things I never had time for when I was constantly walking on eggshells at home. I started painting again, something I had given up years ago when Kelly mocked my talent. I joined a small art club on campus, and for the first time in forever, I felt creative, inspired. One day, during a group painting session, I realized something that made me stop mid-stroke. I wasn't living in reaction to Kelly anymore. For so long, everything I had done was either to spite her, to escape her, or to prove her wrong. But now I was living for me. It was a surreal and liberating realization. I wasn't defined by her cruelty or by my past. I was building a future, brick by brick, and I was doing it on my own terms. My relationship with Adam blossomed naturally, without the usual insecurities that used to plague me. I could see a future with him, and that scared me a little, but in a good way. I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was running towards something better. I wasn't the broken girl who had escaped a toxic home in the middle of the night. I was someone who had survived and rebuilt, and that gave me strength. Every day felt like I was adding a new piece to the puzzle of my life. The more I built, the more distant the trauma of my past seemed. Of course, I still had bad days, days when the memories of Kelly's cruel words or my mom's neglect would bubble to the surface. But they didn't control me anymore. I had taken back the reins of my life, and nothing could make me give them up again. As my college years continued, I started to realize that this was only the beginning. I had a future ahead of me, one filled with love, fulfillment, and freedom. And for the first time, that future felt bright. By the time my senior year rolled around, everything felt like it was finally falling into place. College had been a transformative experience for me, not just academically, but emotionally as well. And Adam, he had been my constant through it all. He wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my best friend, my confidant, my biggest supporter. With him, I didn't have to hide any part of myself. He knew my whole story, about Kelly's cruelty, my mom's manipulation, the nights I spent crying in the shelter. And he never once looked at me differently. He never saw me as broken, only as someone who had been strong enough to rebuild. We had talked about our future before, in passing conversations about where we'd live after graduation or what our dream careers would be. But marriage? It felt like something distant, something too good to even consider after everything I'd been through. It wasn't that I didn't believe in love, I did, now more than ever, but the idea of truly committing to someone, of letting someone in so deeply, still scared me in a way I couldn't fully shake. And yet, with Adam, those fears slowly faded. He had proven, over and over again, that he was different. He wasn't going to hurt me. He wasn't going to leave. He loved me not in spite of my past, but because he understood it and respected the person it had made me. That's why, when graduation finally came, I wasn't nervous about the future. I wasn't afraid of what was next. I had worked hard to get my degree, to build a life that was mine, and I was ready to take the next step, whatever that looked like. The evening after graduation, Adam and I went out to celebrate at this little restaurant we loved, tucked away from the chaos of the city. It was cozy, quiet, with candles flickering on each table, and it felt like the perfect end to a chapter that had been filled with so much growth. I remember feeling light, happy, like everything was finally settling into place. After dessert, Adam shifted in his chair, looking a little nervous, which wasn't like him at all. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box and sliding it across the table. My heart stopped. I knew immediately what it was, but the reality of it didn't fully hit me until he opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. He took a deep breath and looked into my eyes, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I love you," he said, his tone sincere, like he had been waiting to say this for so long. You're the strongest person I've ever known, and I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me? Tears welled up in my eyes. My mind raced with flashes of everything that had brought me here. The nights spent escaping my past, the painful memories of Kelly and my mom, the time I spent in the shelter trying to figure out who I was. And now, sitting here with the man I loved more than anything, I realized that for the first time in my life, I felt completely whole. I felt safe. I felt loved. I didn't need to think about my answer. Through the tears, I nodded, and I whispered the word that felt like it had been waiting in my heart forever. Yes. Adam's smile lit up the entire room as he slipped the ring onto my finger, and in that moment, everything felt perfect. This wasn't just an engagement. It was a promise, a future. For years, I had been running from my past, from the pain and trauma that had followed me like a shadow. But now, sitting across from the man who had stood by me through all of it, I realized that I didn't need to run anymore. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. After he proposed, we stayed at the restaurant for a while, talking about the future, where we'd live, what kind of wedding we wanted, how excited we were to start our lives together. For the first time, I wasn't just dreaming about a better life. I was living it. Later that night, as we walked home hand in hand, I couldn't stop glancing down at the ring on my finger. It was beautiful, yes, but more than that, it represented everything I had fought for. It was a symbol of the life I had reclaimed, the love I had found, and the peace I had worked so hard to achieve. Adam squeezed my hand gently, pulling me closer. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. I smiled up at him, feeling more at peace than I ever had. "Yeah," I whispered. "I'm more than okay." In that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I was ready. I had built a life of my own, one filled with love, hope, and endless possibility. And as Adam and I planned our future together, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that I couldn't wait to write. As I sit in the cozy living room of the home Adam and I built together, a quiet sense of peace washes over me. The soft hum of life surrounds me. The ticking of the clock, the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air, the sound of birds chirping outside the window. It's the kind of peace I had dreamed about for so long, but for a time, never thought I'd actually have. My past with Kelly and my mom feels like a distant nightmare, something I've long since woken up from. I used to think about them constantly, their voices echoing in my head, reminding me of all the pain they caused. But now, those memories are faded, like a bad dream you can barely remember in the light of day. Therapy helped me unpack the years of trauma, peeling back the layers of hurt that Kelly's cruelty and my mom's neglect left behind. I don't think those emotional scars will ever completely disappear, but they don't define me anymore. They're just part of my story, not the whole of it. I've built something new, something that's entirely mine. I'm a college graduate now, something I never thought possible back when I was hiding in that shelter, unsure if I'd ever get a second chance at life. And even though there were times I doubted myself, times when I thought I wasn't strong enough to break free from my past, I made it. I stood up to the people who tried to tear me down, and I walked away stronger. The biggest part of this new life, though, is Adam. He is my rock, my partner, and the love of my life. I never thought I would find someone like him, someone who truly sees me for who I am, flaws and all, and loves me even more because of it. Our engagement marked the start of a new chapter, one filled with promise, trust, and an overwhelming sense of joy. Adam has taught me that love isn't supposed to hurt. It's supposed to heal, to lift you up, to help you become the best version of yourself. With him, I feel safe. With him, I feel loved. For the first time in my life, I can say that I am genuinely happy. Not the kind of fleeting happiness that comes from a brief moment of distraction, but real, deep, lasting happiness. It's a feeling that comes from knowing I've survived the worst, and I've built a future that's filled with hope and possibility. I've learned that it's okay to leave toxic people behind, even if they're family. That was a hard lesson to learn. Guilt can be a powerful chain, keeping you tied to people who hurt you simply because you share blood. But family doesn't always mean loyalty, and it doesn't always mean love. Sometimes, the people who should protect you are the ones who cause the most harm. And I realized that I didn't owe Kelly or my mom anything, not after everything they put me through. I owed it to myself to move forward, to find peace, to build a life free from their influence. It's okay to prioritize your own well-being. I know that now. I've learned that it's not selfish to want a better life, to seek out happiness, even if it means walking away from people who can't or won't give it to you. I had to let go of the idea that I could fix things with Kelly, that somehow if I just tried hard enough, our relationship could be salvaged. The truth is, I didn't need to fix anything. I just needed to walk away. The home Adam and I have built is more than just a physical space. It's a symbol of everything I've overcome. Every room holds memories of laughter, growth, and love. The walls don't hold the echoes of my past anymore. They're filled with the warmth of a future I've carved out for myself. And while there are still moments when old fears try to creep back in, I remind myself that I'm not that scared girl anymore. I'm not running away. I'm running towards something. This is my life now. A life filled with promise, surrounded by people who love and support me. It's a life I fought hard for, and it's a life that I am deeply proud of. I have goals, dreams, and a future that I'm excited to embrace. And most importantly, I have a sense of peace within myself that I never thought I'd find. My past doesn't control me anymore. It's a chapter I've closed, a story I've learned from, but it's not the story that defines me. I'm moving forward, building a life on my own terms. I'm stronger than I ever thought possible, and I'm finally free. This is my new beginning, my brighter, better future, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.